Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on Web3 NFT and IP Connection. My name is Hillary Brill. I am the Technology Policy Advisor for the Decentralized Future Council, a public interest initiative devoted to educating policymakers about emerging technologies like today's topic, NFTs, that are transforming the conventional uses of the way we use and the actual architecture of the internet. The DFC aims to articulate the public interest potential for decentralized web technologies to enhance commerce, communications, and democracy more equitably. This panel is brought to you also by the FIlecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web and the Internet Education Foundation. Today, we have a timely conversation in front of us. The Congress is very interested in this topic. Specifically, Senators Tillis and Leahy have asked for a study on the connection between NFTs and intellectual property rights. And in response, the administration, specifically the USPTO, the Patent and Trademark Office, and the Copyright Office are currently holding roundtables. In fact, there was one yesterday, which some of you attending may have been in the panel or on the roundtables for trademark and NFTs. And there are going to be two more, one on patent and one on copyright next Tuesday, which some people in our panel today are going to be participating in. So if you liked what you see here, you might listen in there as well. Also, if you just found out that the administration is working on this topic and you're interested and you have something you need to say or want to share, they are accepting written comments by February 3rd. So this is an opportunity for you to share your opinion and views on NFT and IP rights. Now, I want to get to our esteemed panelists and get into the topic at hand. But first, I want to say that this is a conversation a bit about history repeating itself. In the early internet economy days, there were new decentralized technologies like the internet itself that was pushing the boundaries of intellectual property and laws. Now, today, we call it Web3. It's basically new technologies that are similar to, that include NFTs, that are doing the same thing. We are pushing the boundaries of IP and policy. They're challenging the definition, they're challenging the scope of IP protections, but they're also empowering and inspiring small and large creators alike and different ways to use content and participate with each other and the internet economy. So our panelists today are going to talk about those issues and more, but I like to do what folks call generally table setting. So we all are on the same page regarding what are the actual definitions of some of these phrases. And we may have lay people that are listening in, or even people who think they know what an NFT is and they're not sure. In fact, the PTO has one of its questions saying, please help us define NFT. So with that, I'm going to look well, I should introduce all of you. I'm going to look first to Jonathan Victor, who is the current ecosystems lead and for NFT and gaming for Protocol Labs, but has worked on a variety of different areas for Protocol Labs and other companies. So he is going to be the first to help us understand NFTs, what they are, how they connect. But can I briefly just say we also have Madhavi Sunder, who is thank you, Madhavi, who is a professor from Georgetown Law Center, who teaches on all matters of intellectual property law. We have Cy Danley, who is, hello Cy, who is the former general counsel of the Copyright Office and also has taught copyright law at GW, and also is working at Latham and Watkins right now as partner with some clients that are in the NFT space. And we are fortunate to have Kat Walsh, hi Kat, from Creative Commons, who has worked on many different intellectual property matters. And this is, I'm sure, her most new and exciting area because it is pushing the boundaries of what do we do with licensing and ownership. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing from all of you. But Jonathan, if you could take the lead, get us set up, explain to us what these terms mean, that would be most helpful.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Hillary. Yeah, great to meet everyone. I guess maybe to take a step back. So I think there's probably a few terms that are worth putting some definitions behind. So Web3 is like a broader bucket, blockchains inside of Web3, smart contracts inside of blockchains, and then NFTs inside of smart contracts. So Web3 as this like massive, broad, and kind of vague term, I think there's many different definitions that have been thrown around. I personally really like the one that Jay Graber, the CEO of Blue Sky, put forward. She wrote a great blog post about Web3 is self-certifying. And I think a way of thinking about it is this is like the set of technologies where you sort of get this verifiability property out of them. So this is broader than blockchains. Blockchains give you that through like how blockchains sort of like have a distributed ledger where anyone can verify the state if they're running these nodes themselves. But it could also include things like IPFS, or if folks are familiar with like secure scuttlebutt, there's other protocols that are not blockchain related that still fit in this massive realm of technologies that really rely on cryptography and verifiability as like the underlying primitive. And the reason I bring this up and say it's important to start with Web3 is because as we move towards NFTs, we'll realize that not every NFT is fully living on chain. And so it is important to understand like how these things all intersect because these technologies are related to each other. So in a broad bucket, Web3 is a superset of blockchains. It includes things like IPFS, which is quite heavily used with NFTs, but really is talking about these things that have these like verifiability properties inside of them. And when I say verifiability, I'm talking about how do we know that from one computer to another that this thing is talking about the same asset. Inside of that, we have blockchains. There's many different blockchains out there. People sort of disagree about what are the right properties blockchains need, but in broad strokes, effectively as a blockchain is a distributed ledger. Think of it sort of like a computer program that anyone can run, and we can all verify that the state is being transformed in the right ways. Your computer is a state machine. It is running programs inside of it, but your computer is not telling anyone else like what it's doing. If someone was to ask your computer, like, what is the state of a specific program that's running locally, we're all sort of assuming it's true. The magic thing that blockchains do is they have a way of agreeing about how should that program move forward over time. So when we think about like a blockchain and its progression, as there's more and more transactions, the really magical property that blockchains bring that databases don't really give us is that we don't have to trust any single entity to know like what is the new state of the world and what is the new like output that we should all be working off of. Blockchains use a thing called consensus mechanisms to do that. You might have heard of proof of work or proof of stake. Those are like nuances about like how do we agree about what the next step in this blockchain is. But effectively, the magical property that blockchains have is the ability to move forward in time and for us to agree that this is the new state of the world. So working backwards, Web3 to blockchains. Blockchains give us state. Now we can start building into smart contracts. So when we have this ability to like move a computer forward in time, and we can all agree that this is like the new state of the world, we can build a new type of application that didn't exist before. This is what smart contracts are. A smart contract is just a program that runs on top of a blockchain. Technically, if you go read in the history of smart contracts, probably not so relevant for this discussion, it's a slightly broader thing. But mostly when people think about smart contracts in the context of blockchains, what's interesting is you have a program that's running on this like verifiable like ledger that we all know what the state of the world is and how it's moving forward. So unlike if you have a Facebook account and like maybe Facebook changes something behind the scenes, or maybe like Twitter deletes your tweets, like those are things that can happen because like the back end of that is controlled by a specific company. When you're building on a smart contract, the back end is this immutable ledger, this thing that we can now like all sort of like trust as a source of truth. One specific use case for smart contracts are NFTs. So like NFTs themselves, like literally are just an agreed upon standard of types of smart contracts. So you might hear the term ERC 721 or 1155. These are the two most common ones in the Ethereum ecosystem. In Solana, it's different. In Tezos, it's different. But each of those are just specifications of different types of contracts. And so anyone can make an NFT that meets those contract specifications, and that makes it like effectively an NFT. If you made something that had more properties than what is defined in that contract spec, and this is literally just in a GitHub repo, everyone, it's like in the same way, like if you look at any other specification standards, it is just something that the community has broadly agreed that this is what we define to be an NFT. Like this is effectively like what we're talking about. It's specific smart contract that is living on one of these blockchains. So the thing that's interesting is like NFTs themselves can be anything. I didn't use the word art inside of there. I didn't use the word like finance or anything like that. It is literally just a program that is like meeting some specific properties. So like there are functions that you can call on that smart contract and it will give you a response, but you can use an NFT to represent anything. And it also means you can build applications that just consume NFTs, whether that NFT, and so this is what happens with wallets all the time, whether that NFT is of a piece of art, whether it is a digital object in a game, whether it is like a financial asset, all of that is irrespective. Like, I mean, those are ways that we interpret what the NFT is as humans in the world. But like from the perspective of the computer, from the perspective of Ethereum, it is just a smart contract. If someone's building a wallet, now everyone can conform to that same standard to say like, oh yeah, if I want to show the NFTs that you own, I know I'm looking for things that look like this, and then I just display it in the wallet. So I realize that probably adds some layers of complexity to how people think about it, but I think like this is broadly how those things sort of orient. To add one last layer of complexity to bring it all the way back to why did I bring up Web3 to begin with? An NFT itself is just effectively, you could think of it like a digital object, you could think of it like a receipt. An NFT usually on a chain is not actually, it can store the asset itself. For practical reasons, people don't always do that. And so a lot of times it is also just a URL. So literally, if you go to the NFT on a block explorer and you click, there's a function you can call to say like, I would like to see the image URL. It is just pointing at something that lives elsewhere on the internet. Now that could be using an HTTP URL, so pointing at someone's server and you hope that that server is there in perpetuity. And that thing could be something that someone then like has access controls around. So you can get things like permissioning if you don't want to show your NFT to the entire world. It could also be using something like IPFS or one of these other distributed technologies, which gives you a way of referencing the asset regardless of where it lives. So I guess like to really open the aperture, an NFT can literally be anything. All an NFT is a contract standard. It allows developers to then build applications and interfaces that consume that like object, but how we ascribe rights to it, how we sort of like represent things, those are all human choices that we can make. The NFT itself is just a standard that once we implement it, like then everyone else can build on top of that same canonical building block without having to reinvent the wheel. And maybe later we can talk about what are other alternative applications, but yeah, just to sort of like level set there.
Thank you. That was fantastic, especially going into the weeds a bit, a tiny bit, for some of the lay people out there or people that aren't, researching this or working on it. I think that the average person, and all of you would agree, think of an NFT as art. They look at the mainstream media that is pushing out 70 million for this digital artwork, or Paris Hilton is investing in a Paris Hilton world with NFTs. So people are thinking of it as something that it can be just silly, or there are different responses to NFTs. I always say there's like a hostile aggression to NFTs. A lot of people are very angry at the NFT market. There's healthy skepticism, especially because the NFT market and cryptocurrency market had its bubble and it burst. There is cautious optimism, and there's general technological interest. So I feel like there's just this whole span. And depending on the responses, it has to do with whether or not you truly understand necessarily what it is and what the technology is. Before we move on, I have used this example, so I want to give the correct appropriation, because since it's talking about IP rights, to Sai, because you have given a very high level, non-technical description of how people should think about NFTs. And if you don't remember, I think you know what it is. If not, I can give you some hints.
Was it about the stars?
About the stars.
Yeah. So this analogy stuck in my head the very first time I read about NFTs, which in the back of sort of pulpy magazines, you would often see an advertisement saying buy a star, right? And you would send in $50 or whatever, and then you would own a star. And what did that mean, really? What that meant really was that in the particular like company's ledger, its books, they would have listed all the known stars, visible stars in the sky. And then next to each one, they would have a name. And when you put in your $50, all they would do is they'd write your name next to that star. They would send you a certificate that said, you are now the owner of,
right,
whatever XYZ star is out there in the sky. And so therefore you own it. Now, did you really own the star? Do you have any property rights to the star? Of course not. What it was you would get a nice certificate. And then for this particular company's ledger, you would own the star. Now, it didn't stop any other company from setting up their own ledgers to sell their own stars. And so at the like highest level, and that may be the most sort of uncharitable take on NFTs, I will say. I mean, I love, Jonathan, the point you made about, NFT is just a technology platform. And ultimately it's like, what do humans build on top of it that really matters? And so you can imagine something saying like, I'm selling things that I don't even own, right? That's one version of the NFT. But, we'll talk, I think, a little bit more, Hillary, about there are ways of building on top of this technology platform that actually do give you something that looks a little more like an ownership right, but is a little different. But that to me struck me as a sort of like the analogy that like immediately came to mind when I heard about NFTs. It is just like you're putting a name in a ledger. It's pointing, as Jonathan said, oftentimes doesn't actually have any content in the block itself. It's just pointing to some other thing. And there's nothing stopping me from setting up an NFT that points to anything on the internet or anything anywhere else, pointing to stars in the sky. Even I could probably set up a modern NFT star chart. By doing that. So that to me is like, as a sort of layperson, that struck me as a kind of like natural analogy.
And Jonathan, you mentioned that NFTs can be used for all sorts of things and not just art, but I think it is worth mentioning a few examples. And I'd love folks to chime in for how NFTs are being used. Perhaps you can talk even about some of the Madhavi, you could talk about, or anyone could talk about some of the cases that are happening, just to understand how are these NFTs being used right now, and then we can go into why there's confusion with IP rights.
Maybe I can give like 3 sort of orthogonal things.
Sure.
I think one of my favorites is a very boring use case. There's a thing called the proof of attendance protocol. It's literally you go to an event, you scan a little QR code, and you get like a little NFT. There is no value to it. It's just fun to collect. You meet someone and it's like, oh, I was also at this thing. And you just find things to talk about. It's like a very boring use case, but I think it's actually really cool because it's like, I think this is an example of like, what are things that we're not considering that are potentially like useful applications for it? And fun, I would argue, is a useful application. Another one that's really interesting is there's a team called Molecule who they've created a thing called VitaDAO, which is using NFTs to help fund research. Effectively, what they've done is Molecule, the organization, is setting up legal contracts, but then after they do the initial legwork, they assign the rights to a token holder of these NFTs, and those NFTs then can be traded. And so there's a lot of like, the thing that's actually more interesting about what they're doing is trying to figure out how to bridge between like the legal and also like the digital worlds. But once you do the initial legwork of like setting up the right legal contracts that point at the right technical contracts, all the downstream transactions are now anchored to the NFT. And it's not like you're working again to like rewrite, resell, do all of this other work. It's like you can now work inside the digital world where things are a little bit simpler of like, I literally just hand you money. You can go reference and see like, what are the legal contracts that this is tied to? You can see that it's like anchored to the right smart contract, all of that good stuff. The third, and also I think maybe most tangible, is people have seen things like Fortnite where you have digital skin that you can buy and that's locked inside of one ecosystem. People build NFTs and are even implementing other ecosystems NFTs as ways of acquiring their player bases. So there's a game, one of my friends who's anonymous, who's been building this, but effectively in order to bring in a lot of user groups, they look at some of these like profile picture communities and they built specific character art that then says, if you are, let's say, a Bored Ape or one of these other like prominent clubs, if you come into our game, you will get like a custom skin for free. And it's creating just like another way of using the other on-chain signaling to say like, how do I attract specific player groups to be able to play in my game and transact and do all the other normal stuff that you might see in a video game, but using the fact that these are built on public ledgers as ways of like bringing in other communities. So again, it's not necessarily like these are all just like specific the art use cases. They're more like, how do you use the properties that come with this specific technology to then enable new experiences or new types of transactions that might not have been possible before?
Yeah, so a couple of other, I mean, the sort of magic if you will, of the NFT is there's sort of three aspects to it, which I think are what make it sort of a powerful tool. One is it creates digital scarcity, right? You're able to enforce scarcity. That's one. Second is traceability. You always can tell, because it's on a blockchain, the sort of provenance of any particular NFT. And third, authenticity. It allows you sort of, in the right context, and this is where the sort of human element comes in the right context, it can give you sort of proof that this is like the official NFT. And so there are lots of, so digital collectibles, obviously art is what we're talking about. That seems to be the like major use case, whether that's Bored Apes, whether that's other pieces of art, whether that's, NBA Top Shots, that's the sort of natural use case that has all three of those things, where all three of those things are really important. Scarcity, you don't want anybody to be able to sort of own that particular piece or say that they own the NFT for that particular piece of digital property. You want to enforce scarcity. You want it to be authentic. You want it to be, we don't have the actual physical signed thing anymore. So you want to make sure it's authentic. You want it to be traceable. You want to make sure that this is the thing that you're getting is the like real authentic thing. You want to trace it back to its original. Other things that are like that too. I think tickets to events, special events, things like that. You can imagine an NFT kind of implementation of that kind of ticketing. Transferability is another sort of thing where you can say, okay, in addition to being scarce, you can actually take it and sell it to somebody else, and then they own it and you don't, which is hard to do in a digital environment. So, if you can imagine digital tickets being an example of that, there are lots of there are lots of instances of people buying. If you've ever tried to buy a ticket from a scalper, 50-50 that's going to actually be a legitimate ticket, and because they can just make a photocopy of the original ticket and sell it to you and make it look pretty good, and you don't know that it's not a real ticket until you actually show up at the turnstile and hand it over and find out, actually, no, that was just a copy of a ticket, not a real ticket. So something like ticketing might be another use case. Jonathan mentioned gaming, in-game purchases. You can imagine where you can create an in-game economy for particular skins, particular assets within a digital game. That's another kind of use case you can imagine. So, I think it remains to be seen the full scope of use cases for this technology. Again, it's like thinking about what are the areas in which those 3 or 4 different features of the NFTs are important, can help, where they can be helpful. Moving especially from a physical to a digital environment, that's the kind of thing that we'll see this really, I think, be implemented more and more.
Maybe just to like add one little tweak. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut off. But just to like clear on one thing, I think as people are talking about like AI, I actually think these properties are much more important than we think right now. So you look at like DALL-E, ChatGPT, the idea that like we will have, and whether it's happening on like in the next couple years or the next 5, I hope if people haven't played with those technologies, they should, to see like where is the trend line of technology going. Having cryptographic answers is one thing that like you cannot fake with like generation. Like this is the sort of thing where cryptography is our friend. And so we should be thinking about this as like the yin and the yang, where like if we're trying to figure out who is the authentic creator of a piece of work, you will not be able to fake that if you have like blockchains and you have sort of like these cryptographic tools behind things. So it's not all like we're theoretically like talking about stuff. I do think these are like critical properties as we move forward.
That was very helpful. Madhavi, did you want to?
Yeah, no, this conversation is so interesting. I mean, I think so far we've been talking about, the technicalities of the technology underlying the NFT. But if we really go to the million or billion dollar question, right, is like, people's art in 2021 sold for $69 million, one work of art, where before that he hadn't sold anything for more than $100. So it is the value generated by the technology? No, this is not technologically constructed. Neither is it legally constructed by copyright or trademark. This is all sociologically constructed, socially constructed value. And at the same time, it's not really value that's anything all that different from where does art get its value? Where does the Beanie Baby craze, what drives that value? What drives fandoms and their love and desire to pour billions into a community and membership and experience? So I think these technical questions are really kind of related to how do we capture the ever expanding universe of potential social value, and the NFT is the latest tool, one of the latest tools for enabling us to create some kind of artificial scarcity, as Sai and Jonathan have so helpfully described for us, creating that scarcity, the artificial authenticity of a one in a world of billions of stars, right? But you have your one star that you own. And that's really what the NFT does. The question though, so I think part of it is, if the value doesn't come from the technology itself, but the technology is a tool to heighten that value, neither does it come from law, because I think on the first cut, you could argue that none of this value comes from copyright or trademark. But I think the bigger question in terms of where we need to go, right, is usually though, law follows value. And we always, we have a derisive saying among law professors, if value then right. And we're not very happy about that. But now if there is billions of dollars of value, 40 billion annually right now in NFTs, will the law follow by expanding trademark, expanding copyright to protect somebody's value in these new properties? And so I think that's kind of an important and exciting question for us to be thinking about moving forward.
Thank you. I think that was very helpful and good construct to think about it. What I find so interesting is that there is this fight in the press about NFTs are dead. And then if you look right now, you'll see that every possible brand owner that you can think of is either investing in NFTs or thinking about it. And yesterday's trademark panel had tons of different brand owners exclaiming actual benefits of NFTs. So while there are definitely concerns that I think we should go into next about the IP rights that you get with an NFT, because I want to clarify to the people that are listening in that really want to understand what rights do you get with IP. I think it's important to know that while there is confusion, there is some enthusiasm, actually, particularly with brand owners. At least that's what I heard yesterday regarding authenticating certain brands, having an actual NFT that ties into a purse. So if you want to sell a purse on a secondary site, you have this NFT authentication that it was purchased from Chanel and it's an actual Chanel purse. So there are these ways to help. It's like a technological, I don't want to say solution, but technological tool to help you know whether or not you're getting a counterfeit. So there are these positive sides to it. So now that we have kind of set the stage with as much time as we have, I would love to dig into what rights do you actually have? Intellectual property rights do you have when you buy an NFT? Madhavi, I'm just gonna look at you for that.
Okay, sure. And I know Kat seems like she wants to jump in on this.
I didn't see you, Kat. I apologize. Let's ask you, Kat, after.
Sure. So, and just briefly, I think actually the more interesting questions are around trademarks and brands here. But with respect to copyright, when you buy an NFT, you're just getting kind of this link to an object. Maybe it's an art object, but you don't get the copyright in the art object. In the underlying object. So typically the creator would continue to own the copyright in the art object, or whoever they may have authorized or transferred their copyright to. So copyright doesn't transfer with the ownership of the NFT. And that's not really all that different from if I went in and bought an Andy Warhol, an original Andy Warhol, I would have the right to display that physical painting in my living room if I wanted to. I would have the right to resell that painting, but I don't have the right to reproduce it. I don't have the right to make derivative works from it or to distribute it or to publicly display it on the internet or anything like that. So similarly, the NFT, actually, you get even fewer rights because you don't even have a physical, tangible thing to display in your living room, right? You just have that link. So it doesn't really confer any kind of copyright. And I do think it could potentially, and we've already seen some examples, raise interesting questions about copyright infringement. So one case that got a lot of attention was the supermodel Emily Ratajkowski. She basically wrote an essay calling out the celebrated appropriation artist Richard Prince, who basically took photographs of her from Sports Illustrated. She only got like maybe, you know, a few $100s for posing as a model for the swimsuit issue of Sports Illustrated, but he created, you know, huge blow up Instagram posts of her in her bikini from the magazine and made $100,000 on each one of his portraits. She decried this as, you know, male ownership of the female image and of her body and image, but she kind of did a jujitsu move by buying the work of art from Richard Prince. And when she hung it in her living room, she stood in front of it and had a photograph taken of her standing in front of the Richard Prince photo. And then she sold an NFT of that photograph, right? And this was kind of like her reclaiming ownership in her own image. She made $140,000 on selling the NFT. But at the same time, and even the Top Shop, NBA Top Shop, NFTs in images of important moments in basketball, in current action and all of that, or NFTs of famous TV clips or movie clips that are also being sold. Well, somebody else owns the copyright in those underlying NFTs, in the film clips, in the TV clips, in the NBA shots, and here in Emily Ratajkowski's example, you know, Richard Prince owns the copyright in his work, which is in her NFT. So there's obviously these like multiple layers there. And one other legal issue that is going to arise just around copyright is the issue of the copyright owner now having to go and police it. Basically, when the owner of an NFT, the beauty of it is that you actually can't stop other people from seeing it or reproducing it. And so everyone can see it. But they know that you're the one owner of the original authentic link. That's great, but from a copyright owner's perspective, that's like a lot more sites and places on the internet that they're now going to have to go police for public display, public distribution, public reproduction, et cetera. So more there. I mean, I think there's other things to talk about. I do think, though, the really interesting things about branding and who gets to control the NFT world and the NFT value of your real world brand is kind of like the next big question, just like we faced at the end of the 20th century around domain names. And Congress gave trademark owners the exclusive right to have that domain name in their brand that they've created. And so the question now, with respect to some of the cases that are making their way through the courts in trademark, is will Congress give the exclusive right to profit from the NFTs in your brand to the brand owners? Or is that going to be more of an open space? So I'll stop there.
And that was very helpful. And Kat, I again apologize. I didn't see. I'd love to ask you if there's anything else you want to add between NFT and IP rights, but what confusions have you seen? What issues have you been working on in the connection between NFT and intellectual property?
Sure, and I'm probably going to start with a fair amount of background in that one of the most interesting things I've seen in the NFT conversation is people really coming to terms with the separation of like the idea of ownership of a thing, ownership of the token, and ownership of the copyright, like the right to make copies. One of the things that I like seeing at CC is opportunity for people to play more with different models of like what it means to own a thing and what rights they want to buy and what rights they want to give away. So copyright, especially in the US, but in a lot of places, is mostly an economic right. It's some artificial thing to like stop the natural conversation that would happen. When you create a piece of art or some other thing, like the natural thing is that people see it, they incorporate it into their knowledge and their thinking, they want to share it with their friends, they want to do other things with it. And copyright is usually putting some barriers on it to say like, hold on, like we think that the creation of these materials is valuable. We think that the copyright holder should be able to get some economic benefit so that they can keep doing that, keep creating that art. So we're going to put some limitations on it to allow that to happen and stop that natural conversation from otherwise happening. At CC, mainly what we do is provide some standardized tools for people who do want to give away some of those rights and keep others. For example, a lot of things that people release under CC licenses, they say, oh, you can share this as much as you want, but you have to credit me, or you can share this as long as you're not selling it.
Oh, I think we got a glitch.
Interesting. Oops.
We had a tiny little glitch. You have to backtrack 10 seconds, what you were trying to share.
Let's see. So CC provides a standardized way for people to like figure out what it is that they want. Like they may just want credit for their work and allow people to share and remix as they want. They may be happy with any distribution as long as people aren't selling it. NFTs allow people to play with different models and even to get some of those economic benefits without having to use copyright. So people can buy the NFT and they get, and the artist gets something from that and has even more freedom to say, like, maybe I don't need these rights. Maybe I want to let people share this work. And even it allows people to make sure that their work is shared like outside the context of just the like this limited ecosystem of people who are like experimenting with these new technologies. People can take that work if it's licensed openly and put it into contexts that wouldn't be seen just by people who are interested in new technologies. There's been a lot of confusion I've seen in the space of people who are like buying an NFT and they don't know what they're getting. They just, there's just this assumption like, oh, I've bought the token, therefore I've bought the rights. Like, and they're surprised when people copy it. They're surprised, they're surprised when those rights aren't all in a bundle together. But once people have started to find those ideas and explore the possibilities, they're like, oh, like, maybe that's not what I wanted after all. Maybe what I wanted to buy was like access to the artist or access to the forum. Maybe what I really wanted to buy was like the sense that I am part of this community of people who really love this thing. And it's even better for me if people actually copy the art and put that out into the world, make it part of the greater conversation because I got what I wanted out of that.
Thank you. And that's really important. In NFT, we were just talking about confusion with NFT and IP rights, but you mentioned this a bit in the beginning, Victor. An NFT can provide access to an artwork or access to a ticket or access to proof of attendance, but it also, it depends on what you want it to have. So you can be part of a community. You can get other benefits with an NFT. We need to, because once we start talking about IP, we generally think of artwork, right? So it's important to note, and I think what you said, which is, once someone realizes, wait a minute, I don't have that IP to it, or if it's open to others, maybe that's okay. I think that's important. I think one other issue that I've seen is that people see an NFT. Okay, I get it. So my NFT doesn't give me the copyrights to this NBA Top Shot, let's just say. But one thing, and this isn't with NBA Top Shots, but I have heard that there have been concerns with that access could be, as you mentioned, Jonathan, like a URL, and that could disappear. So even though you purchase an NFT, it doesn't guarantee that forever you're actually going to get access to some kind of artwork. I assume there might be technological tools to come out to help with that, but that seems to be something else that's coming up, which is an NFT may not actually give you the access you even think you're purchasing. Something to just keep in mind when talking about NFTs. Any other issues related to NFTs that have come up in all of your work, or issues that you've had to work on when talking about intellectual property and NFT?
I guess this is maybe related, but when people think of like royalties and sort of like the payment flows, I think one of the things that's really interesting about blockchains is they give us a mechanism to sort of like do more sophisticated things with payment flows and guaranteeing them. At the same time, I think people might not understand from a technical level, what is the blockchain actually doing? And so I think people get sort of surprised when like they've put in a royalty and maybe that's not respected by specific marketplaces. Like when I think about how these things work, I even think about it because I work a lot more on like the infrastructure side. It's like, what are we getting from like a protocol layer of things? And I think at a protocol layer, there's certain properties we want. Then there's also sort of like the social and like legal side of like, for people like OpenSea or Magic Eden, what are the things that we would like to enforce from a society standpoint of saying like, if you are advertising that you're going to respect royalties, like this shouldn't be a thing that you can or can't turn off. Like you as a corporate entity should be required to do X, Y, and Z thing. I think there's other protocol native versions of this, and I think this is where it gets even dicier for some of like the on-chain NFT marketplaces. But thinking more like, what are the rights that people, to the point that Kat was sort of bringing up, like what are the rights people think that they're getting? I think that's both on the purchaser side. I think it's also for the creators and what they think they are like imbuing into this asset, and how we make sure that there's like strong protections on both sides of that.
Well, I think one of the important key issues that you guys have clarified here, and it was an initial concern of NFTs, is do you have an intellectual property right to some type of artwork or some type of creative work with your NFT? And the answer is no, right? I'm just going to have everyone shake their head, unless
so
is right,
unless
so
the contract says
is,
so, right?
Right. So go ahead, Sai, give the second part of that. Unless.
Yeah. So I mean, there's nothing automatic about NFT like that gives you any rights in anything. And it's all about, at the end of the day, what are the terms on which you are buying the NFT? What rights do they purport to give you? What authorization does the seller of the NFT actually have? And so there's just sort of a category of issues in terms of like understanding from the consumer perspective, what are they buying? And understanding from the seller perspective or the artist perspective, to the extent the artist and the NFT like minter are not the same person, what is the artist selling? That's a legal problem, right? That is a problem of contract law fundamentally. And so, I think that as this marketplace is maturing, we're getting to a point where people are thinking about standardized ways of writing NFT contracts. I'm so glad Kat's here. I know they sort of are the pioneer. Creative Commons really the pioneer for doing this in all sorts of other areas of law. And you can imagine a similar sort of project for NFTs where you say, look, by looking at the sort of designation CC0, once you've learned the sort of nomenclature, what that means, what rights you get. And sort of having that kind of standardized structure. This is not a government regulation point. This is just like industry coming together to figure out like, how do we put some standards around the like licensing layer of this? I think is sort of where we're at now, and what a lot of the serious players in the space I think are working on.
Thank you, because that was going to be the next segue, Kat. I was going to talk about, we have ownership issues and we have licensing issues, and people have actually looked to you specifically and Creative Commons for a solution. And if you could share with us some of your thoughts on that, some of your experiences, what you think in the short term or potentially long term, your role would be with Creative Commons and NFTs.
Yeah, so one of the great things about the CC licenses is that they're extremely general purpose. They can be applied to almost like any copyrightable material. So one of the things that we've been hoping to do with people who are in these communities is provide ways for people to incorporate the CC licenses as part of the like NFT contracts that they're putting in. So you'll have a contract that governs all the other rights that go along with the NFT, and then say like, and for the rights to like copy and distribute this piece of art or this copyrightable object, like a text or whatever it is that people are minting NFTs for, like that's under CC. And that way that the work can be part of both the NFT community and make it into the wider commons and be remixed with all of this other material. So that it doesn't have to live in this isolated ecosystem. One of the big problems in the both the free software space, the free and open source software space, and the content space is that there are a lot of incompatibilities in licenses, and you'll see this like, oh, this is open and this is open. I should be able to like remix them and use them together. And if they're under different terms, you often can't legally. So we'd like to work with people to like, how can we make this basically a module in your system so that you can make these works remixable and also give people the other rights accompanied with the NFT that they might want, like, access to forums, access to events, whatever else that they've decided is the best model.
So you are working on some kind of standard similar to what Sai was saying, some kind of, you're calling it a module, some kind of potential language that NFT creators can use. So that is happening.
So we're not working on a new separate tool. We're mostly working on ways to incorporate the tools that already exist into the things that people are newly developing. Because I don't see a particular reason to change the way that the IP rights, that the copyright is handled for works of art, but just the way that it might interact with other contract terms.
Which makes sense. And I did read an article that actually called out Creative Commons, and it said there seems to be two camps of creators, one that wants to use your open license and one that like absolutely doesn't. And I know that there's been, if you're reading up on the NFT world and particularly the NFTs that get the most controversy, like Bored Ape, Yacht Club, and some of the ones that lots of people have questions about their value. And Madhavi, I appreciated you saying who's to say whether a diamond should be a diamond or a rock, right? Like it's value that we place on it as society. But that Bored Ape was trying to create these new types of licensing specifically to address concerns about whether it should be accessed or copied. And these questions are going on. It's happening as we're talking. One big elephant in the room, and then I want to address is somebody mentioned it. There are secondary markets for NFTs that are tied to digital assets, and then probably secondary markets. I have to be honest, I'm not as in the depths of research on this, but I'm assuming there will be a secondary market for NFTs that are tied to physical objects, right? Or StockX has its own lawsuit right now pending because they have an NFT that it authenticates a pair of shoes that's in a locker. The reason why I say this is OpenSeas has been attacked for counterfeit NFTs being on there, for unverified NFTs being on there, and then other secondary markets. I'm not calling them out as a bad platform, I'm actually calling them out for going through an experience that is quite personally to me, having worked in the secondary market since early 2000s, having worked in eBay, dealing with brand names, and how do you get trust in both your consumer and trust from the brand owners. So they're working this out, and I see the same thing, history repeating itself with how do you verify owners? How do you educate your consumers? How do you educate the creators? How do you create a system that works? Because if there isn't trust, nobody's going to want to resell these items. So it's nothing new, to be frank. It's the same problems that were happening with analog assets, and I just think it's worth mentioning. I don't know if you folks have been working with some of the marketplaces, but a lot of people like to say, oh no, NFT, NIP, there's counterfeit, there's fraud, but there have been a lot of movements forward in that area, and there still needs a lot more work because it's there. It's definitely a concern.
Yeah, I mean, I think an important challenge here is authenticity, is making sure that when part of it may involve sort of law litigation. Some of it is just ensuring that consumers understand when they're buying something. You know, the NBA Top Shots, they know that it's blessed by it's licensed by the NBA, so they know sort of the official place to get to buy NFTs of these highlights, right? And so some of that is going to be solved in the free market. Some of that may be, disclosure requirements. I don't know exactly how it'll all play out, but I think that is an important aspect here. And the other thing is, the royalty flow issue is an interesting one, and figuring out how across different platforms to enforce the royalty payment requirements that sometimes when an artist wants to mint an NFT, one of the benefits of the smart contract construct is that you can. There's been a lot of debates about resale royalties, right? So for secondary sales of that piece of artwork, enforcing an ability to continue to pay the original artist some portion of those resales downstream. And so some marketplaces have that ability. They offer that to artists, but as soon as you take it off of that platform, then that kind of breaks. And so that's another challenge in this space, is how do you enforce those types of arrangements where the original artist, no matter where that NFT lives, continues to get the benefit of downstream sales. I think it's a really if we can sort of figure out that challenge, it's a really powerful benefit of NFTs that you have this sort of automated process by which the original artist can continue to see the benefits of downstream sales of their works, of their NFTs of their works.
In the next 10 minutes, I want to remind the audience that we do have question and answers that you can type in, and some have taken advantage of it and some answers have been given. Please feel free to put up any questions you might have, but regulators are looking at this issue and they want to know, as I started off the panel saying that we have this study going on, I would be interested in knowing what you think we do next? What recommendations, if any, do you have for regulators or policymakers that are looking at this NFT issue that you would like to share?
I can go first, maybe, but I have a much more general answer, which is I think it's important to really narrow the scope of like, what is the problem that we're trying to solve for? As I started at the top, there's a number of use cases for NFTs. They are much broader than just like the art use case. And so as we think about like regulation and how we want to like think about, because these are real problems to solve for with IP and NFTs, I would be careful about not accidentally like potentially like cutting off other use cases that don't really require the same sorts of like process. And again, just to give a very concrete example, so Uniswap is an AMM that stands for Automated Market Maker. It's a DeFi protocol. The only reason I bring it up is if you are participating in Uniswap, the way that they represent like your like participation is an NFT, which you can also like destroy to get back your like tokens that you've like participated with. So the main point I'm making is that like that is a very specific use case for an NFT that is very orthogonal to this entire discussion. So specifically when we're thinking about regulation, it's just recognizing NFTs are very general tools. And so we should be thinking about in the specific applications that we're trying to like reduce the harm or make sure that we're not enabling bad outcomes, let focus the regulation in the correct way, because otherwise there are really like impactful and potentially important things that might get stifled accidentally.
Anyway, anyone else want to share? Right, Madhavi?
Yeah, I'll just jump in just to say, in terms of kind of thinking of the analogous moment in time when, you know, Congress was thinking about domain names. And even though at that time, the brand owners really got kind of like the stick in their bundle, the additional stick in their bundle to have the domain name associated with their brand because of the goodwill they had created around the brand, there's still free speech exceptions, you know, exceptions for gripe sites, exceptions for other kinds of uses. And so I can imagine that we want to essentially make sure that people continue to have the same, if not more freedom in this context than in other contexts. So there's that, but then at the same time, I want to go back to Sai's point, right? Because is the NFT kind of a new like empowering mechanism to renegotiate some of the things that, you know, individuals may have lost before. So for example, Emily Ratajkowski saying, you know, why are the women who are actually driving the value in these images not able to benefit financially? And so using the NFT to now create a mechanism to keep on becoming monetarily compensated with each view of the or transfer of the NFT, for example. I think that's exciting about like a new technology and the new possibilities there. Similarly with the Black creators of the dance moves that are sold as emotes on Fortnite. And again, are we going to, you know, as the value in this space, the NFT space grows, is it going to be the same old actors that profit? Or will some of the traditionally disempowered actors who bring value to the top shots, to the emotes, to the images and photographs, will they have an opportunity to kind of use this tool to claim some of that value?
I think that the questions, we're at a good point for regulators to think of questions that we seem to look at 10 or 15 years later. And you brought up an equity considerations, some rights considerations, fair use considerations. Like we are not necessarily thinking of, wait, what happened there? We're not doing the whiplash of the back. And we have the opportunity to say, who is creating these NFTs? Who are the communities using it? Who's benefiting from it? What are they being used for? Are we putting in all of the thought now to try to prevent some of the concerns that we're seeing now? I think that's like a very useful and important thing to think about for regulators as well. Kat, is there anything you wanted to share for regulators?
Yeah, my main concern is to avoid creating new IP rights that are very specific to this case that would influence copyright more broadly, such as like influencing fair use rights, limitations and exceptions, and activities that are just not copying a copyrightable work. Copyright is really attractive because there are a lot of very like expedient remedies it's very clear. But I think a lot of the problems that people are really facing in this space are more to do with both trademark and unfair competition, and say like securities offerings where people think they're investing in something and they aren't actually like getting, like there's no promise of the value that they were promised. But yeah, I'm wary of expanding IP rights for this space, particularly because I think it's a good opportunity for people to like explore using models that don't necessarily say link the minting of an NFT to an IP right that allow them to explore other models for getting the value out of those that they could get.
Well, I'm cognizant of time, and I see that we do have some questions. Some are being answered. Some will not have time to be answered, and they might be a bit more technical for the remainder of the time. I do hope that those questions, if you want to reach out to the Decentralized Future Council, we would be happy to get answers for you, or from some of the panelists. I just want to end on since I'm a cautiously optimistic person when it comes to technology, I will lay that out there. I'm not going to ask what your personality is. I'm just open and honest about it. I'm cautiously optimistic. I would like to end on a positive note. What are we doing right in this space, if anything? And I mean, I have my thoughts, but it's really about what you guys think. I think there is some that's right out there. What should we remind regulators not to mess with? I think, Jonathan, you briefly said, don't mess with the technology. That's moving us forward. But what are we doing right?
Well, it's not saying don't mess with the tech. I think it's more just being thoughtful about like what are the right places to institute the protections that we want to institute. I think that's probably my bigger nudge. But yeah, I mean, I think overall, I think the fact that we have these sorts of forums and folks are interested in learning more, it is a very fast moving space. And I think it's hard to understand, I think, a lot of this stuff. And so being open to hearing people from different perspectives, I think whenever we have like moments of like extreme progress, I think people can look at it in two different ways, where they're like, maybe it's sort of like the reactionary of like, oh, this is all bad, there is nothing good here. And maybe the other side, which is like complete optimism, there is no wrong, it can only be perfect. I think usually the truth is somewhere in between. And I think, in my view, at least, the best thing policy can be done, or it can do, is like acknowledge like both the good and the harms and try to maximize the good and minimize the harms. So yeah, I mean, personally, the thing that I think that is going quite well is that like we haven't instantly done something very reactionary. I think like taking the time to figure out like what are the actual beneficial use cases and how can we maximize those is like, yeah, really, and yeah, to me, positive.
So, you know, this is a biased view since I was in government for so long, but I do think that it is a thoughtful approach that Congress has taken to ask for the PTO and the Copyright Office to study this issue before jumping in, before having hearing, before anything. And you know, I think those two agencies take this very seriously, and they care about the technology, and they want to understand the technology, in my experience with them, even from the outside. And so that gives me a lot of hope that even if they decide to do nothing or recommend sort of very little, which I personally think is probably the right answer, they'll have given it a lot of thought, and whatever work product they produce will be helpful in helping people and policymakers kind of understand the space at least. So I'm optimistic about what the government will do here, because I think they've done it in a very serious way.
Hillary, I, like you, am also always optimistic, for better or for worse. And I would say at the same time that we have important analogies to look at, and we could tell a story even about the technology, that it's really just doing the same thing, that in terms of creating this artificial authenticity and scarcity in the way that tools from limited edition and prints and everything else have done in the past. So you could say it's the same old story, or you could say, hey, maybe there's a great new opportunity here to rethink issues of IP after George Floyd and equity, and which creators have been left behind. How do we, like Kat's talking about with respect to Creative Commons, how to empower new ways of being in the world and new communities that can be empowered. So I would hope that we can all sit down and think about how to use these tools to create a different kind of world than what's come before too. So
thank you. And Kat, you get the last word.
So I have not traditionally been an optimist. I've traditionally been a skeptic about NFTs, and seeing the way that people have used them has brought me around a little bit. Copyright has not worked that well to give artists a good living. And seeing people experiment with different ways to make art a sustainable career in the space, if that's something that keeps happening, if people can find ways to do that, then I think that's a positive step.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all of your thoughts on this interesting issue. Thank you to those of you who asked questions. I'm sorry that we were unable to answer all of them. I know some people can still busy type away the answers if possible. But thank you. I think this is just the beginning of the conversation. You all do come from different perspectives, so we were fortunate to hear different views. We took away that there are concerns with NFT and confusion with IP rights. We took away regulators are moving forward with the right steps and learning about this issue versus acting quickly, and that there are some positive uses for NFTs. So thank you all for coming. And I appreciate to our audience as well, your interest in this topic that is only going to get more and more interesting in the years to come. Thanks.